This is Parminder Singh Bamra. He's playing the Pakhawaj. The Pakhawaj is a North Indian barrel drum and is often used to accompany North Indian classical vocal music, or Drupad. And this is the 2014 version of the Hofstra University Indian Music Ensemble. That's me, and there's a Pakhawaj. In this video, I'm going to talk about the concept of bi- and multimusicality and my experience of learning a new type of music. I'm going to talk about what the Pakhawaj is, a little bit about how to play it, the experience of learning from Parminder, and how studying Indian classical music influenced me. So let's begin. I was introduced to North Indian classical music in my undergrad at Hofstra University by Dr. Francesca Cassio. She was an Italian opera singer who devoted her life to studying North Indian vocal technique after a visit from a guest lecturer while attending university. She is now the Sardani Harbans Kaur Chair of Sikh Musicology and Professor of Music in the Hofstra University Music Department. When I studied with Dr. Cassio, she taught 2 classes on Indian music. The first was the Indian Music Ensemble, which ran every fall semester, and a class called Sikh Musicology, which ran every spring semester. I joined the ensemble as a freshman, not really knowing anything about Indian music, but I thought it would be an incredibly interesting thing to learn about. My only prior experience or knowledge about Indian music at the time was that Philip Glass and maybe Steve Reich studied in India. I thought their music was pretty cool, so I figured, why not check it out? In her class and in her ensemble, we were using aspects of Mantle Hood's model of learning, meaning we were learning the music through performance, rather than by reading or writing about it. At the time, I didn't really know what musicology was, and I considered the class to be more of a performance methods or ensemble-based class. Everyone in class was expected to either sing or play their instrument in class. If you were a singer, you also played the tampura while you sang. The tampura is an instrument that creates the drone and establishes the key area. If you played an instrument, you would follow the vocal line on your instrument. I remember that we had a violist in the group and maybe a guitarist as well, but I remember the violist learning how to play the sarangi in class. And since I was a percussionist with a terrible voice, I volunteered to keep time. For the first semester in the ensemble, Dr. Cassio taught me some of the basics of Pakhawaj. The 7 strokes, and the tal that we were using in the compositions. Just the basics. She knew enough of the Pakhawaj technique to teach me the basics because her teacher, Bhai Baldeep Singh, taught her the basics. He says in his paper, What is Kirtan?, that some of the students in the Kirtan tradition, which is what her class was modeling, were expected to, quote, become proficient in drum playing, then in the string, before being formally exposed to vocal training. However, in the spring, she brought in Parminder Singh Bamra, an esteemed Indian percussionist and instrument builder, to teach me more about the Pakhawaj. The next section of this video will talk about what he taught me, and show you, obviously, how he taught me. Learning the Pakhawaj is an oral tradition, and has been for centuries, so I was only allowed to record our final lesson together so that I could study what he taught me before he left. So, let's go over the Pakhawaj basics, and I'll try to keep this section a bit brief. This is the Pakhawaj. It is made of wood, has 2 goatskin heads, and has leather straps that hold tuning pegs under tension. You sit with the instrument in your lap, with your dominant hand hitting the smaller treble side, and your non-dominant hand hitting the larger bass side. These tuning pegs allow the Pakhawaj to be tuned to different pitches. The drums are usually tuned to either the tonic or the 5th of the scale, although other tunings are possible, depending on the range of the drum. The larger head often has either a piece of dough fixed to the head, or a traditional black dot head. This dough or black dot adds bass resonance to the drum. Sometimes the bass and treble sides are split into 2 individual drums, kind of like tabla. This instrument is called the Jodi Pakhawaj. Both types of Pakhawaj, and even the tabla, are descendants of the older Metronome, which was traditionally made from clay. There are 7 main strokes in the Pakhawaj. Each of these strokes correspond to a syllable, or bol. These bol are strung together to create rhythmic cycles called tal or tala. Most of that information was covered in class with Dr. Cassio, so when she brought in Parminder, we mostly covered different tal and mastering the different stroke types. Here's a rundown of the 7 main types of stroke. On the left hand, the bass head, you have ge, which is an open stroke. You also have ga or ka, which is a closed stroke on the bass head. And on the right hand, you have corresponding strokes. So you have an open stroke on the center of the head. That's a lower pitch. That's din.
Open. I play like without any what do you call? Just play openly, like just the field. Just play it like yeah, open sound. You know, you should hear it. What you play. If you play, there's no sound.
And you also have na, another open stroke, kind of near the rim, creates a higher pitch. The closed stroke on the right hand is called ta. And it's the center of the head, and I kind of think of it like a slap tone, as if you would on like a conga or something.
Play ta. See, your fingers need to be closed, not like that. Just make it straight, like natural. This curve is natural. I'm not bending it. It's just natural. Okay? Yeah. So then play ta. Good. Even your index finger needs to be gathered. Yeah. So this is called ta.
You also have tita, which is a compound stroke, starting off with the split hand technique and doesn't use the thumb. T uses the middle, ring, and pinky fingers, and t uses the first finger. Both of these are closed on the head, and as you can see, can become really fast.
So about tita, it will go like straight. Because if you go straight, you cannot go far.
It's like the wrist turn.
Yeah, it's wrist.
It's not like
not only the fingers.
Yes, it's
full wrist.
Is it more, like when you're going fast like that? Would you say it's like more wrist or more finger?
Wrist.
Wrist.
It's like this move.
Okay.
You know. Okay. Welcome. Then
we also have the combined stroke da, which is ge and ta together. So an open stroke on the bass head and a slap tone on the right. This was the one that gave me the most amount of problems and was one of the hardest strokes to get under my belt. Something about getting the resonance in the slap in the right hand and also the resonance in the left hand of the bass head was very tricky. And so these syllables are put together to create rhythm cycles called tal or tala, as I talked about earlier. And so now that we understand the basics, here's how Parminder talks about one of the tals that we studied in class, Tivra tal.
The first important thing is like practice on paras and your hands. Once it's set, then I'll give you some more compositions also. Like when you learn in Tivra, okay, Tivra also you need to practice the same way. It's like dha, then double, then triple, then triple. In the Tivra, when you do double, it's like 3.5.
Yeah.
You know, and when you do 3 times, so it comes in the points. Okay, it's a little difficult, but it'll come like dha, then ta, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha.
Tivra tal is in 7 and looks like this in rhythmic notation. Looking at this and connecting that to what he was clapping, you notice that this grouping of 7 is split into a 3 plus 2 plus 2 grouping. As he cycles through the speeds, single speed, double speed, triple speed, and quadruple speed, notice that the single speed cycle stays present in his clap. He performs each speed a corresponding number of times so that they fit within the larger cycle.
Dha, din, ta, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha, din, ta, tik, tik, ka, ta, ga, di, ga, na, dha.
As a percussionist studying mostly classical music, the parallel to the modern rhythmic grid is quite obvious. However, relating the different speed cycles back to the original cycle was something new. This kind of metric game became one of my most useful practice tools for learning music. I often applied this process to practicing with the metronome. For example, while learning a passage, I might start with the metronome on every beat, then every 2 beats, then every 3 beats, then every 4 beats. Then I would have the metronome and repeat the process. Having the metronome and expanding the time between clicks improves one's sense of time almost overnight. As a teacher, I use these metronome games all the time with my students to develop their sense of time and feeling. This almost kaleidoscopic way of thinking about rhythmic cycles is obviously not the only way that rhythm is conceptualized in Indian music, and in order to speak about all the complexities would require a dissertation. However, for me, the most important thing that I remember learning from Parminder was not necessarily the strokes, but this conception and understanding of rhythm. There's also something to be said about how Parminder understands tone quality. Obviously, this recording is not very high quality, but listen to the way he talks about the dun syllable.
Dun. Dun needs to be open. And play like without any, what do you call? Just play openly, like just feel, just play it like, yeah, open sound, you know? You should hear it, what you play. If you play, there's no sound.
He wants a sound that is characteristic of the syllable. This might be an obvious statement, but so much of percussion performance is understanding what the characteristic sound should be. In our many lessons before this final lesson, he talked about how the strokes should feel when you play them. But more importantly, how you say the syllable informs how you play the sound. This connection between a sonic conception and physical understanding was profound to an 18-year-old me, and it's something I still carry with me. What does it feel like to play this section? In thinking about my own experience and the underlying framework of multimusicality, I realized that this experience with Parminder was my first introduction to studying music that I knew nothing about, with somebody who very deeply understood the tradition. By no means do I claim to know this music on a deeper level. This is music that I very briefly studied for only 2 of the 4 years of my undergrad. Additionally, I was very fortunate to study with somebody who had devoted his life to this music. Most of what I remember from this class and experience are the bigger concepts, the stroke names and some basic towel, the feeling of how syllables should sound, and very analogous terms such as the scale syllables. These are not necessarily concepts that have supplanted themselves deep within my musical psyche, but rather differing viewpoints that have influenced how I approach the world. The Western classical conception of a scale is quite different than the way I experienced in the Indian music ensemble. How does that understanding affect my compositions and musical worldview? I don't think I'm able to analyze my own work in that way, looking for Indian music influences, that is. Not because I don't think that they're there, but because my brief contact with that music only opened me up to thinking about different possibilities. I carry this experience with me, and it shapes how I experience other types of music. For example, I often teach my students how to play slap tones on the conga, like how I learned on the Pakhawaj. Not because I don't know the traditional conguero way of doing the slap tone, but because I personally find the Indian way easier for my students to understand. This creates a lineage from Parminder's teachers, to Parminder, to me, and to my students of how to play a slap tone, or a ta stroke. When I want to play something warm, with a nice open tone, I often think about the dun syllable. I think about how Parminder verbalizes the sound that he wants before playing it, so he has a conception of how it should sound. And I should note that I don't claim to be a Pakhawaj player. I merely studied it a while ago. But I would also consider these lessons with Parminder to be lessons in multimusicality. If I were to think of these lessons as a type of practicing fieldwork, as mentioned in the Rice article Modeling Ethnomusicology, I might be able to say that I have also done some ethnomusicology fieldwork. All of this to say that my experience with Parminder Singh Bhamra and Dr. Francesca Cassio opened me up to the concept of multimusicality a lot earlier than I thought. It is just that until taking this class, the term multimusicality wasn't something that I was aware of, even if I had already been exposed to its concepts. As part of this class, we studied Chinese music and instruments through performance in a way that was weirdly familiar to me, even if the music was completely different. It wasn't until self-reflection that I was able to make these connections between the two experiences. And from this self-reflection, I now understand how these musics have influenced me in a way that has opened my ear to new practices. That is, I think there is a significant benefit to experiencing and practicing musics that are unfamiliar to oneself, so that later interactions with other types of music have a sort of conceptual model.